I'm going to introduce a little bit. This is my buddy, Jon Nip. We're in the same band together, so it's God put us in ministry together, which is actually pretty cool. And we've been friends for quite a long time now. I think it's over a decade.
Yeah.
I think so.
13 years.
Yeah, 13 years. Yeah, it's been 13 years, and I'll tell you this: I am usually the pessimistic, kind of look, I'm always like looking, this is going to be bad or blah, blah. And this is the most optimistic guy you'll ever meet. If you ever need to be encouraged, I bet if you talk to him right now, you will be encouraged. Okay, so I'm thankful that John's here with us and that he is a man of God. And I told Marika this too. I believe in men in ministry too, both men and women. But I believe, and he's going to bring the word to us here this morning, continue in John 13. So thanks, John.
That was awesome. Thank you so much. I don't even know where to go from there. That's amazing. Hello, everybody. How are you guys doing? No one here. That's amazing. Yes. It is so great to be with you guys here today. And I've been thinking and praying for you guys ever since your launch. And I'm always encouraged when Shu has any updates about what's happening here. It's exciting times. As mentioned earlier, my name is John, and it's a pleasure for my wife and I to be here today. And we go back, Shu and I go back a long way. Actually, 1 year ago today, Shu, Marika, and I were in the States at a conference. It's the next picture right there. Yes, that was March 17th last year. And so maybe this is our day. Maybe next year, Marika is going to be at SCBC, and she's going to be preaching. So I'm calling it right now, a word of prophecy. It's going to be good times. Be prepared. You have 1 year to get prepared. It's good times. Now, I'm not originally from Toronto. I was born and raised in Ottawa, the home of the government, and a lot of snow. Growing up there, one of my first jobs in high school was I worked in the hospital, the Ottawa Hospital on the Civic Campus. I was a patient service assistant. And my role was to help patients and to clean. And overall, it was a pretty good job. I was a high school student, and I was making $23 an hour. It was great. It really helped with university, and it led to a lot of electronics and video games. I remember when I got the call to take the ER shift. It was New Year's Eve, and I guess everyone wanted to take it off to go party. And they needed someone to fill the spot. So I was ready. I jumped on it. And growing up, anyone knew about the hit TV show ER. And they probably have at least watched one episode. High-impact drama, intense situations, good-looking doctors and nurses. That's what I was expecting. I'd made it. I got the call. I was going to look like George Clooney. Obviously, it didn't turn out that way, but a young Chinese boy could hope. The actual experience of working in the ER was quite something different. Within minutes of stepping in there, I was called to examination room 3. Upon entering, I got a certain smell in my nose. Someone had vomited all over the sink and counter. The nurse turned to me and said, "You know what, this needs to be cleaned up." And I said, "Absolutely. So who are we going to call to do that?" She said, "Well, I just called her. Good luck." And she left the room, which led me to utter under my breath the classic Han Solo line, "No reward is worth this." I mean, it's disgusting. It's degrading. It's stooping pretty low. And in today's passage, we're in John 13 today, Jesus completely shows us a deeper dimension of what it means to serve one another. And if you do have your Bibles, I invite you to turn to John 13 and follow along. I'm not going to have a chance to read through the whole passage today. If you want to look it up on your phones and just follow along, that'd be awesome. This is the story of Jesus serving his disciples, of washing their feet. I remember hearing this story as a kid growing up in church. It's one of the most popular stories of Jesus' life. And my takeaway as a kid was that to be a Christian just meant that we should serve. Period. Done. What I overlooked was the insight into how God was revealing himself to us through Jesus. How he was about to show everyone what love truly is, how we are connected to each other, and in what ways we were going to engage the world. Over the years, this account has become more and more beautiful and more meaningful as the small details came to light. Now, if you have had the opportunity to keep pace with the movement through the Gospel of John, as you guys have been going through in downtown Markham, you'll notice that as John 13 begins, that there's a huge shift of tone and feel in the story. Now, the first half of John 1, chapters 1 to 12, primarily focused on Jesus' public ministry. The many miracles he performed that revealed his divine identity and nature. He was a ray of hope entering into the world, entering into existence to bring about life. And starting in John 13 and heading off into the rest of the gospel, it primarily focuses on Jesus' private ministry. The audience is narrowed to the circle of those who are closest to him. At this moment, Jesus is alone with his disciples. And although his public ministry is coming to a close, he still has a lot to say and a lot to do among those who were closest to him. And this is his final address. And you'll see this from John 13 to John 17. And it's done in a very Jewish manner. There's this invitation into something more. There's specific ways in which to live out everything they've experienced over the years. There's been a preparation for what is about to happen in mere days. Now, the first two sentences of this chapter encapsulate the rest of the Gospel of John, and it really hits to the point. Verses 1, it says, "It was just before the Passover festival. Jesus knew that the hour had come for him to leave this world and to go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end." The annual event of Passover was just around the corner, and this is the time when Jewish people remembered their forefather Moses and the time of the Israelites and how God had passed them over and spared them from death because of their faith and obedience in him and their act of spreading the blood of a sacrificial lamb across the doorpost. And the timing of this was no coincidence, as Jesus would be about to give up himself as a sacrifice to fulfill the purposes of God. His time had come. His time had come. It's been building up to this moment. From the very beginning of the Gospel of John, everything had been leading up to this. Even with Jesus' first miracle in Canaan, where he turned water to wine, he told his mom, "It's not my time yet. It's not my time." And now he is saying, "My time has arrived." So he does what anyone would do if he or she had only a few precious moments left. He spends time with those he is closest to, his friends, his disciples. In all his time, Jesus has been showing this revealing, patient, forgiving, saving love. And here at the end, it would be no different. Having loved his own who were in the world, and that's what he's been doing, and the gospel writer looks forward from this point, he will love them all the way to the end. Everything we see him doing in this chapter is part of his love, and we understand what happens next and how Jesus defines that love. It's not just this feeling of, man, I love you. A love that's lived out in everything he did and everything he said. So that evening, Jesus took off his outer clothing, wrapped it around his waist, and he puts water in a basin, and he goes around and starts washing his disciples' feet. And then he dries them with a towel. Now, foot washing today might not seem like such a big deal, and we can read this passage pretty unimpressed. But back in the day, it was hugely significant. Generally, no one would ever wash the feet of another person. Normally, guests would enter into a house, and the host would provide basins of water and towels for people to wash their own feet. It would be performed, and if it was performed by anybody else, it would be normally performed by a slave. And not just any slave, a non-Jewish slave, normally a Greek slave. It was one of the traditions in that time where rabbis were telling other people that they cannot ask a master, an owner, to force or ask a Jewish slave to wash another person's feet. It was too demeaning, too degrading. The bottom of the foot was one of the most offensive parts of the body. And what Jesus was doing here is he was adopting the posture of a non-Jewish slave. Like, how many of us would jump at the chance to be a slave? This task was degrading and lowly. Very, very rarely in the context of the family in that time would this ever happen. And it would only be from a wife to her husband or children to her parents. It was a sign of extreme submission and devotion. With the social implications of that day, it would always be the one with the higher status would be served by the one with the lower status, never the other way around. In the same way, a teacher would never, ever wash his disciples' feet. Now imagine if Justin Trudeau came and wiped your bum after you took a dump. Let that sink in for a moment. It doesn't matter how good your digestion is. The whole thing is still pretty nasty. And it's shocking because the prime minister is the one doing it. Now, Jesus flips this whole notion completely around, and he shocks everyone by washing the feet of his disciples. And more than that, he washes it during the meal, while they had started eating, and not upon arrival. Now, this was more than just a sign of a humble service, but it was painting a bigger picture of who God is. This was showing God's way. God's way was not man's way. That the way he was going to overcome and redeem all things was not going to be through power and might, but it was going to be through giving up himself, so that all would be made right with him, with each other in the world. Things were already in motion toward what would be the greatest display of love in history. Jesus humbling himself completely to the point of death on a cross, which results and leads to a never-ending life and victory in him. Spiritually, physically, mentally, relationally restored and whole. We ever want to know what God is like? We look to passages like this one. This shows a glimpse of his nature. The exalted and long-awaited king assuming the role of a despised servant to rescue and cleanse others. With such a shocking act, you can imagine there were equally as shocking responses. Peter, one of Jesus' closest disciples, can't believe what he is seeing. This is too much for him to comprehend, too much for him to take in. When Jesus gets to him, Peter asks, "Are you going to wash my feet too?" "Never, Jesus. I will never allow you to do this. This is not the way of things." It was not until Jesus tells Peter that unless he washes Peter's feet, Peter cannot be a part of anything that Jesus is doing. Now, Peter's understandable reaction gave opportunity in which Jesus could engage and point to the deep love and humble way that he would accomplish his mission. This would foreshadow his selfless sacrifice, which was to come. The foot washing was just a glimpse that as Jesus completed his work, it would wash away the brokenness and the barriers that all of us face in our lives and lead us to a brand new way of life in him. Hilariously, Peter feels that clean feet is not enough. "I need a bath, Jesus. Wash all of me." But Jesus' one action of giving up himself is already enough. It's complete. There's nothing else that's needed. The question is for us, as it was for Peter, do we accept that invitation to receive from Jesus? Peter accepts, not really knowing what this fully means. He thinks he's ready. He thinks he's got it. He's like, "Okay, I think I'm getting it. Jesus, you humbled yourself. I'm ready to lay down my life for you. We'll ride together. We'll die together. Bad boys for life." Now, we have all been Peter, trusting in our own actions and performance rather than on Jesus' work on our behalf. Now, have you guys ever had insight on a pastor? When pastors prepare a sermon, we go through these motions. We're always like, am I going to say the right thing? Is this what is God wanting me to say? Is it going to be good enough? God even had to remind me this week. He said, "Trust in me. It's okay. I'm the one at work." But still, we have that in us. And sometimes we have that pressure. And sometimes we crack under that pressure. And even for Peter, very soon after this moment, he would deny Jesus. And thankfully, when it boils down, as it was for Peter, as it is for us, it's not about how much Peter succeeded in living out his faith or how much he failed, but was what Jesus did enough for him? Was Jesus did enough for us? And as we look ahead, we see him laying his life down and coming out on top. His work, his victory. Jesus invites us to be part of that with him. And when we fail, Jesus' ultimate sacrifice and his work on the cross covers all of us. There was another response shown in this passage, and it's the one of another of Jesus' disciples, and that's Judas. He was also one of Jesus' closest 12 disciples, having shared life with Jesus for years. And let's be reminded, Jesus chose Judas, handpicked, spent at least 3 years together, journeying together, working together. Few people could ever claim to be that close. But while Judas seemed that on the outside as a faithful disciple, He had yet to receive Jesus' love and work over him. Jesus chose him, but in the end, Judas does not choose Jesus. Now that's the difference between Peter and Judas. When Peter failed, he ran back to Jesus, who welcomes us and forgives us. When Judas failed, he tried to deal with it in his own way. And realizing the futility of his own efforts, he loses all hope, and he ends up taking his own life. Judas refused to let who Jesus be to be enough for him and to trust in his word. And as a result, he leaves the dinner with clean feet, but with unclean soul, giving in to temptation. It comes up in this passage over and over that Judas had been tempted by demonic forces. And it's evident that he doubted the goodness and the way of Jesus. Now maybe Judas was just tired of waiting. He followed Jesus around all these years, waiting for the Messiah to do his thing, to finally overtake the Roman oppressors and to restore the glory of the Jewish people. And what was this Messiah doing? Lowering himself to the point to the posture of a slave? Serving food to him? This was not going to be that guy. He doesn't have what it takes. Better to let officials have him than all of us to go down with him. We could still do something, but this Jesus, he's not the leader we need. But little does Judas know that the way of Jesus is down, to selflessly give of himself, even to the point of a cross, so that everything that God desires to do will be accomplished. Now, we all have been Judas in our life, living in a way in which we believe we know what's best for ourselves and falling into the temptation of disbelieving God's love and goodness for us. We've all been Judas. And the thing that's shocking in this passage is Jesus knows that he's about to be betrayed. There's no surprise here. He knows he's about to be betrayed. The disciples have no idea what's happening. All they see is Jesus handing Judas a piece of bread. And that's a sign of affection, by the way, to serve one another. And Jesus giving him a command. Surely Judas isn't going to betray Jesus. Jesus just sent him on an errand. Why would you trust someone to do something if you thought that person was going to let you down? Now, we know the rest of the story, but the disciples were oblivious. And I love how, as this whole chapter comes to a close, I love how it says in verse 30, it was night. A darkness now looms over the story. In the Gospel of John, there is always this duality between the light and the darkness. Saying that it was night was more than just telling the audience what time of day it was. It was saying something evil is happening. We are in the end game now. As much as people beat up on Judas, though, the temptation he faced is one that we all experience. We often think we know better than God, and that his way is not going to work, and that it's too hard or too impossible. That our definition of love and goodness is better than his. We think our work and our efforts can get the job done better than God can. And then we live out of that. And as Judas betrayed, and as Peter was about to deny, and as we have failed in our life, we turn our eyes to the one who stepped into the world to do something about that. Now, throughout the whole Gospel of John, it's evident that as the author was writing, he is portraying that Jesus is more than just a man, more than just a human. He is the God-man. He's fully God, and he's fully man. He has angel armies at his disposal. In Matthew 26:53-54, Jesus says, "Do you think that I cannot appeal to my Father, and he will at once put at my disposal more than 12 legions of angels?" Angel armies. All the miracles that Jesus performed pointed to his divine nature and his authority over all things. He is the king. Verse 2 in this chapter even says the Father had put all things under his power. And what does Jesus do with his authority and his status? You heard it a few weeks ago if you were here in John 10, verses 17-18. I lay down my life so that I may take it up again. No one has taken it away from me, but I lay it down on my own initiative. I have authority to lay it down, and I have authority to take it up again. In other words, it may look to bystanders that Jesus is just the victim of betrayal to mob violence or conspiracy or mock trials and fickle governors. But what Jesus is saying is, I am in charge here. I am in charge here. Nobody takes up my life. I lay it down willingly. I take it up. It is a kingly sacrifice. Jesus was in charge when he died, how he died, and when he would be raised from the dead. To take this point further, Jesus informs his disciples about Judas' impending betrayal, so that they will see that Jesus is no mere pawn of a plot, but this all plays into God's redemptive story and purposes in Jesus. There's no one greater than Jesus. He is the GOAT, the greatest of all time. When I first heard this term, it was to describe Michael Jordan, and then later on in comparison to LeBron James. And I was like, GOAT? These men are not goats. These are basketball players. They don't have 4 legs. They don't have horns. But both his airness and King James have got nothing on Jesus. In John 13, Jesus shows what it means to both love and to have authority in this very tangible example. He humbles himself and washes his disciples' feet. Afterward, he explains to them. He says, do you understand what I've done for you, done to you? You have called me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for so I am. In other words, I do have that authority. I do have that high standing. If then your Lord and teacher have washed your feet, so if I have that high status, if I have that authority, and I am willing to humble myself to serve you, you ought to wash one another's feet. We should humble ourselves and serve each other. For I have given you an example that you also should do as I have done to you. Truly, truly, I say to you, a servant is not greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. So this is really clear. Jesus' status and standing is high, and therefore, by ordinary standards, he should be the one served. But instead, he contradicts those standards, the ordinary standards of our world, and he humbly serves others. From his height, he goes low. He shows lowly love. And that's what the gospel is, that Jesus would empty and humble himself to come to us to rescue and redeem us. The highest of high becomes the lowest of low to show his love and his saving power. This is love. This is the point of us serving one another. Jesus shows us to be great is to serve. And even in washing his disciples' feet, Jesus revealed something more of who God is and his nature. That's the kind of God he is. As Judas departs, Jesus tells the rest of his disciples about his imminent departure. Little children. How endearing is that? Little children, I am going to be here just a bit longer. Where I'm going, you cannot come. These next steps, Jesus is taking alone. He's giving up himself fully to show his love. It was only after the cross and resurrection that the disciples would fully understand. They would look back on moments like this and see and be reminded of what it meant to be truly loved. And as the story continues through the disciples, they now step out and do the same. Where I'm going, you cannot follow, but later on, you will follow. After the resurrection, that's how they would be to engaging the world. A new commandment I give to you, Jesus says, to love one another. Well, that doesn't sound very new. You might have heard it before, Old Testament, or Jesus say it before. Love one another. Yeah. But Jesus is saying it in a new way. He says, love one another as I have loved you. That's new. That's the new perspective. It's not just love one another as you love yourself, because that can go all over the place, but out of what Jesus has done for you. The new standard is love each other as out of Christ's love and in ways that reflect and model that love. The gospel story continues even to this day as we are called to show that into this world and to selflessly love and serve one another. Now, as you guys continue to take these steps of considering what does it mean to be this community, and I take the same steps at SCBC, continually figuring out who we are called to be, it begins with Jesus and reminding ourselves of his lowly love and his goodness. He gave us this concrete image of what it means to be loved, washing our feet, going to the cross. Without that, we would be unable to live in the ways he calls us. Without that continual receiving of God's love, we're unable to love others because we'll just burn out, or we'll get frustrated, or we'll grow empty. We would not have the resources to do the same. It always has to start and always has to be continually defined by who Jesus is and what he has done for us. He says in this passage, unless I wash your feet, you will have no part in me. Do we receive his love? Do we receive him selflessly giving of himself? Do we take what he's done over us to repair our relationship with God and with each other and start to be on that process of ending all things that would destroy, weigh, and tear us down? That's the reality and truth we get to and we need to continue to live into and to remind ourselves of. No matter what we're facing right now, how deep a hole we might find ourselves in, the greatest of all time lowers himself to meet us there and to bring us life in him. There's nothing that is beyond him. There's no greater power than him. You might not see it now, but because Jesus died and rose again, you can be assured that he can do something about it. Receive the same words that he gave his disciples. You do not realize now what I'm doing, but later on you will understand. Hold on to that. Hold on to him and trust in him. Your theme has been stay, go. You might be asking yourself the question the classic English punk rock band, The Clash, asked, darling, you got to let me know. Should I stay or should I go? And the answer is yes. The answer is yes. It is both. Because to remain in him is also to be part of what he is doing. To stay connected to the one who was sent to us is to follow him to where he is sending us. To be loved by God is to let his love flow through us. To live this out is quite literally to humbly live our lives outwardly. And as we receive this love, he changes us into loved beings who get to love one another. Unless you have received it, you won't be able to give it. Unless you have been cleansed, you are only going to make things messier. I think of my son Grayson trying to put away his toys while his hands are covered in sauce and sticky with melted lollipops. He's not cleaning anything. He's making things worse. If we have not received Jesus' love and work on our behalf, everything stays the same. Everything stays transactional. It's what I do and what you do for me in return. Everything becomes about ourselves and what we get out of it. Expectations and strings are attached. The pattern continues. But because Jesus humbled himself to enter into our stories, I love the story that was shared earlier by Cynthia. I was like, I don't need to preach. You should just continue talking. That'd be awesome. Because Jesus entered into our stories and begun his work, he breaks those cycles in our lives. All of this shapes our motivations and our attentions. Everything points back to him, back to the good news. When communion is taken, we are reminded to take that in remembrance of Jesus. It is both an honor and to be remembered into that community and story. As the Master shows us lowly love by washing our feet, we are instructed to do the same as it reflects him and opens ourselves to experience and be changed by him in the process. Humility is key for us to encounter God, and it opens up a space for meaningful relationships and connection to happen. We might look at this passage and feel that we're being just ordered around. Why should we serve each other? Why is Jesus telling us we should serve each other? But what Jesus is actually pointing to is the truth of how we get to live our lives. God actually planned it out from the very beginning of how we are to live our lives. The world actually works better if we are all selflessly giving of ourselves to help each other flourish, rather than just pursuing our own desires and interests. The former leads to mutual flourishing and growing together. The latter leads to war, division, and greed. Something miraculously and beautiful happens when we treat each other in these ways. When we have that same posture of humbling ourselves to serve others because it comes out of a place of what Jesus has already done for us, these are divine moments. And when we engage each other and those in our midst with lowly love, whether it's our family, our coworkers, our classmates, our neighbors, Jesus is welcomed into those spaces to be encountered and experienced. Verse 20 of this chapter says, truly, truly, I say to you, whoever receives the one I send receives me, and whoever receives me receives the one who sent me. In other words, you represent me in such a way that if someone welcomes you and your intentions, they welcome me. Now, we live in a culture where this type of love, this type of service would be scandalous. On one side, people are skeptical and suspicious. Why do you want to serve me? What do you want out of it? On the other hand, as much as people can appreciate the outward expression of humility and being helped, they may not be ready yet to welcome a person into their lives or accept the one who has given himself to love and redeem them. Now, this should be no surprise to all of us. In all of our hearts, there is this struggle between the light and the darkness. John 1:5 talks about how these two things cannot exist. They are opposed to each other. And as the gospel unfolds, we hear again and again about those who choose the dark despite their exposure to the light. In Jesus' day, audiences divided when he taught them. In Judas, we have a man who could not be any closer to the light, but he chooses the darkness. Does this happen today? Does this happen in our lives? Of course it does. But one of the most amazing things about the gospel is that Jesus continues to pursue us. That when we have failed, or when we have betrayed him, or when we have denied him, he still loves us. The betrayers, the liars, Peter, Judas, you and me, he still humbly serves us. He still humbly desires to wash us and make us clean. As much as we reject and deny the light, he does not reject us. We don't have to run away from him when we fail. We get to run to him because that's who he is. In a culture that is hostile toward the light, it makes it that much more important of how we intentionally live out our lives. And humility breaks the power of hostility over us. A community that strives to show what they have received from Jesus get to do the same to others. We get to be that kind of people. We get to be that kind of refuge, a place of care and service, irregardless of how it's reciprocated. This is the difference that Jesus makes in our life. This is how the power struggles are defeated and how dynamics with others take a whole new existence. Got a bad boss at work? Honor them. Someone you feel is out to get you or has hurt you? Care for their needs. Your neighbor is disrespectful? Pray for them. Serve them. Someone let you down? Humble yourself. Wash their feet. Someone who will never raise a finger to help you? Give up yourself to help them flourish. This is the humble ways of Jesus. This lowly love points to something more. Do people see in us the ultimate humble servant and the effect he has on our lives? Lowly sacrificial love points to Jesus, who gave himself up for us. In him we are fully loved and accepted. We no longer have this need for approval or people please. We no longer have to live by a fear of rejection. We are already fully accepted and loved in Jesus. That's the King we love, who loves us, and we pledge our allegiance to. And service is more than just helping a hand, but the way in which we bring light into this world and show off the one whose light is restoring and redeeming all things. This world is hungry for that. This world needs that. Where I missed the mark as a kid was that this message was not just about serving each other, but rather have we received and are we a reflection of Jesus, who loved us and humbled himself to the point of the cross to rescue us. It is impossible for us to imitate this lowly role of Jesus unless we have received what he has done for us. Jesus only expects his disciples to wash other people's feet after he has washed their feet. Without this prior life-consuming experience of God's love, we will be ill-equipped to love anyone else. To serve as Jesus served requires him, and he breeds in us humility and sacrifice. It leads us to take that lesser role for the benefit of someone else. Henry Nouwen, the popular author, Catholic priest, theologian, he taught at Notre Dame, Yale, and Harvard. He moved to a community here in Toronto called L'Arche Daybreak, a residential community serving 100 mentally impaired people. You ask most pastors, they have probably read at least one or if not multiple of his books. He wrote, L'Arche exists not to help the mentally handicapped get normal, but to help them share their spiritual gifts to the world. Once again, to help them to serve, to understand Jesus and to serve. The poor of spirit are given to us for our conversion. In their poverty, the mentally handicapped reveal God to us and hold us close to the gospel. Henry Nouwen, a man whose life was so deeply touched by the gospel, and what he experienced there, it transformed him, and it gave him the joy of service. I've had the chance to visit L'Arche once, and it's a place of belonging. It's a place where people serve each other and care for each other, no matter of where they're at. And if you have the opportunity, I'd invite you to go visit. It's not too far from here, and they have public services every week. To close, I want to make a final point. Now, humility and sacrifice and lowly love can sometimes seem like a very somber topic to talk about. But for Jesus, it was for his joy to give up all of himself for us. Serving is not grumbling submission, but to experience and enjoy God in the midst of our lives with each other and as we go into the spaces we live. It has the power to supernaturally connect us. It has the power to reconcile differences and bring about a brand new way of life. Some Christian traditions, some churches around the world still practice weekly washing each other's feet to remind each other of what Jesus has done for them and how they are to love one another. The command to love is for our joy. The fullness of life of Jesus mentioned back in John 10, and ultimately for his glory. It has its first application in the people who want to know him and desire to follow him. Self-giving love can become the natural characteristic of a community that follows and imitates him. You'll hear very soon in John 15 that there's no greater love than to lay down oneself for his friends. And then as we engage each other in the everyday stuff of life, we hold the same attitude and purpose. In verse 17, Jesus tells his disciples, if you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them. And the word blessed really does mean you will be glad, happy, and joyful. This is not just the merely old notion that it's better to give than to receive, which people often quote out of the New Testament in a very superficial way. There's a depth of living this out as it relates to what Jesus has already done for us. Jesus is saying to his disciples and to us, if you realize what I'm saying, if you understand who I am, the authority I have, the love I have for you, how I brought you into who I am, and accept the invitation to join me in humbly and sacrificially reaching and serving this world, you will be glad. You will find the deepest joys in your life are not when people are praising you for your popularity, accomplishments, or performance, but when they are helped by your service. I started today sharing a story about when I worked at the hospital, that there's no reward that was worth degrading myself to clean up vomit. For Jesus, the result of his lowly love, the humiliation and suffering he endured, the pain and betrayal of abandonment, the bearing of the consequences of brokenness of everyone, it was worth it for him. He gladly gave himself up because the prize was us. The reward was that we were able to be brought back into him through his work, and that we could live out a new reality in him. That we could be part of who we are in him and seek the flourishing of all those around us. So as we have received from him, let us go and do the same. Let's pray.